The conference room was a monument to expensive minimalism. A single slab of polished obsidian served as a table, so vast and dark it seemed to absorb the light from the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. Liam sat on one side, his posture perfect, his hands resting calmly on the cool surface. He looked at the three people opposite him, the family who had, until 8 weeks ago, been his. Richard Harlow, his father-in-law, sat in the center, a man whose expensive suit and self-satisfied smirk were as much a part of his anatomy as his bones. To his right was his son Marcus, whose arrogance was a cheaper, louder version of his father's. And beside Marcus, looking pale and uncertain for the first time Liam could remember, was Chloe, his wife, the woman who had taken his life savings and vanished without a word. Richard cleared his throat, a sound of practiced authority. Liam, he began, the name rolling off his tongue like a piece of lint he was eager to flick away. We're glad you agreed to this meeting. It's time for everyone to be adults and move on. Chloe has made her decision, a difficult one, but the right one for her. He believed he was in control. He believed Liam was a broken man, a small-time architect who had foolishly given everything he had to a woman far out of his league. They all believed it. They thought this meeting was a formality, a final act of dismissal where they would offer him a pittance to sign some papers and disappear from their lives forever. They didn't know that the room they sat in, the building that housed it, and the fate of their own company were all, in a very real sense, owned by the quiet man they had so carelessly discarded. This meeting wasn't their conclusion. It was his beginning. It's amazing what you can learn about people when they think you have nothing. It's a lesson that can be painful, but also incredibly clarifying. I'm sure many of you watching have experienced something similar. That moment when someone shows you their true colors because they think you don't matter. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories about the masks people wear and the truths that lie beneath, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss how this unfolds. The story had begun, as so many do, with love, or what Liam had believed was love. He'd met Chloe at a gallery opening. He was there to appreciate the art. She was there to be seen. He was quiet, observant, dressed in a simple but well-tailored gray suit. She was a supernova of charisma, all bright laughter and flashing eyes, surrounded by a coterie of admirers. Her father, Richard, owned a moderately successful construction firm, Harlow and Son, and the family moved through the city's upper middle class with the unshakable belief that they were its rightful center. Liam, by their standards, was nobody. He told them he was an architect. It was the truth, but not the whole truth. He let them assume he was a lone practitioner, sketching extensions for suburban homes, a respectable but ultimately small-scale profession. He never corrected their assumptions. He drove a modest car, lived in a comfortable but unassuming apartment, and spoke about his work with a quiet passion they mistook for a lack of ambition. They saw him as a project for Chloe, a handsome, stable, but ultimately malleable man who could be polished up and presented as a suitable, if unexciting, husband. Liam, blinded by his affection for Chloe, allowed himself to be molded. He endured the family dinners where Richard would hold court about his latest municipal contract bid, punctuating his monologue with dismissive questions to Liam. "I suppose you don't deal with budgets of this scale, do you, Liam? It's a different world." Liam would simply smile. "It's very impressive, Richard." Marcus was more direct. He treated Liam with the open contempt of a school bully. "Still drawing up people's dream kitchens, are we, Liam? Someone's got to do it, I suppose." Through it all, Chloe would squeeze his hand under the table, her expression a mixture of apology and impatience. "They don't mean anything by it," she would whisper later. "It's just how they are. They just want the best for me." Liam believed her. He loved her quick wit, the way she seemed to fill every room with energy. He thought her family's obsession with status was a superficial flaw, a shell she would eventually shed. He was wrong. It wasn't a shell, it was her skeleton. The catalyst arrived 6 months into their marriage. It was an idea, presented with breathless excitement by Chloe and Marcus over dinner at the Harlow family home. "It's a boutique lifestyle fund," Marcus announced, leaning forward with the unearned confidence of a man who had never failed because he'd never truly been tested. "We're getting in on the ground floor, high-end eco-tourism resorts. The projections are astronomical." Richard nodded, his expression one of paternal pride. "My boy has a good eye. This is the kind of bold move that separates the men from the boys." Liam listened quietly, a familiar sense of unease settling in his gut. The pitch was full of buzzwords: synergy, disruption, first-mover advantage, but thin on concrete details. "Who's managing the fund?" he asked, a simple, practical question. Marcus waved a dismissive hand. "A top-tier team out of Zurich. Impeccable credentials. This is all very high level, Liam. You wouldn't know the names." Later that week, Chloe came to him in their apartment. She sat beside him on the sofa, her energy softer, more intimate. "Darling," she began, taking his hand, "Marcus and I have a chance to get a significant stake in the fund. A real, life-changing stake. Dad is helping, of course, but we want to put in a serious amount of our own capital, to show we're serious players." She paused, her gaze searching his. "I was thinking, that money you have, the savings you put away for our future house, for our life." Liam had been saving for years. He had told her it was his life's savings, the culmination of his career. It was £250,000. He had intended to use it to buy a plot of land for a house he wanted to design for them. A special house, a prototype of ideas he'd been developing for years. He had shown her the early sketches, and she had smiled and called them sweet. "My savings," he repeated slowly. It was a lie, of course. The £250,000 was a significant sum, but it was to his actual net worth what a bucket of water is to the ocean. It was an amount he could lose without catastrophic consequences. But she didn't know that. He had maintained his quiet, modest persona, wanting to be loved for who he was, not what he had. "It's everything, Chloe," he said, testing the waters. "Everything I've put aside." "I know," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But imagine what it could become. Marcus says we could triple it in 18 months. We could build any house you want then. 10 houses. It's for us, Liam, for our future. It's just speeding things up." She leaned in, her scent enveloping him. "Don't you trust me? Don't you believe in me?" This was the question that mattered. He looked into her eyes, wanting to see a partner, an equal. Instead, he saw the feverish gleam of ambition, the reflection of her father's values. A cold knot of certainty formed in his stomach. He knew, in that moment, what he was truly being asked to do. He was being asked to buy his continued place in her life. The money was a tribute, a fee paid to her family's dynasty to prove his worth in the only language they understood. And so he made a decision. It wasn't about the money, it was about the truth. He needed to know, once and for all, what this marriage was built on. Was it a foundation of rock or sand? "Okay," he said softly. "If it's for us, then of course." The look of relief and triumph on her face was blinding. She kissed him, a passionate, grateful kiss that felt entirely different from all the ones that had come before. It felt like a transaction being sealed. The next day, he transferred the full amount into a joint account she had opened. He felt the weight of the number, £250,000, not as a financial loss, but as a wager. He had placed his bet. Now, he would wait to see how the hand played out. He just hadn't realized how quickly the dealer would show their cards. The transfer of the money was followed by a week of effusive affection from Chloe. She was vibrant, attentive, full of plans for their glorious, wealthy future. Then, the shift began. It was subtle at first. Her phone calls became more frequent, but they were with Marcus and a host of other people Liam didn't know. When he'd enter the room, her voice would drop to a conspiratorial whisper before she'd end the call with a breezy, "I'll call you back." The true turning point came 2 weeks later at a dinner party held at the Harlows' sprawling home. It was ostensibly to celebrate the launch of the new venture. The house was filled with Richard and Eleanor's social circle, bankers with soft hands and loud opinions, developers' wives with surgically tightened faces, and their assorted, unimpressive offspring. Liam stood by Chloe's side, a glass of champagne in his hand, feeling like a ghost at the feast. He was an accessory, a prop to complete the picture of Chloe as a successful young woman with a handsome, if unremarkable, husband in tow. No one spoke to him directly about the venture. They spoke to Chloe, to Marcus, to Richard. Liam was smiled at, nodded to, and utterly ignored. The humiliation was methodical, delivered with the precision of 1,000 tiny cuts. Eleanor, his mother-in-law, a woman who weaponized passive aggression, glided over to him. "Liam, dear," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "It's all so terribly exciting, isn't it? We're so proud of Chloe and Marcus. They're taking such a brave leap. It must be wonderful for you to get to watch them soar like this." The implication was clear. You watch. We do. You are a spectator in your own marriage. Liam maintained his calm facade. "I'm very happy for them, Eleanor." The main event came during the dessert course. Richard, standing at the head of the long, candlelit table, tapped his crystal glass with a spoon. A hush fell over the room. "Friends," he began, beaming, "tonight we celebrate not just a new business, but a new chapter for the Harlow family. My children, Marcus and Chloe, have shown the courage and foresight that has always been the hallmark of our name. They have taken a bold step towards securing their own legacy." He raised his glass. "They have invested not just their intelligence and their time, but their own significant capital to make this happen. They are true stakeholders in their own success." He paused, his eyes sweeping the table before landing, for a brief, dismissive moment, on Liam. "This is what it means to have skin in the game." The room erupted in applause. People turned to congratulate Chloe and Marcus. Chloe, caught in the golden glow of her father's approval, smiled brilliantly. She did not look at Liam. She did not acknowledge that the significant capital they were celebrating was, in fact, his. He was not a stakeholder. He was not even a footnote. He was the anonymous donor, the silent backer whose contribution had been absorbed into the Harlow legacy, his name erased from the ledger. Marcus, emboldened by the wine and the adulation, leaned across the table towards Liam. His voice was just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Don't worry, Liam," he said with a conspiratorial wink. "Once the real money starts rolling in, we'll make sure Chloe pays you back for your little contribution. Maybe we can even hire you to design the doghouse for one of our resorts." A few people chuckled. Chloe's smile faltered for a second. She shot Marcus a warning look, but it lacked any real heat. Liam felt the eyes of the table on him. They were waiting for a reaction, for him to flush with anger, to stammer a defense, to shrink in his chair. He did none of those things. He took a slow sip of water, placed the glass down with absolute precision, and met Marcus's smug gaze. "That's very generous of you, Marcus," he said, his voice even and devoid of emotion. "But please, don't worry about it. Consider it a gift." The quiet sincerity of his response disarmed them. Marcus was left sputtering, unsure how to respond to a man who refused to play the victim. Richard frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. They had expected a satisfying squirm, and Liam had denied them the pleasure. He had absorbed the blow, and in doing so, had subtly taken control of the moment. But inside, the wager he had made felt colder, heavier. The odds, he now knew, were not in his favor. The foundation he had been testing was not just sand, it was quicksand, and he could feel it pulling him under. The 6 weeks that followed the dinner party were a masterclass in emotional erosion. Chloe drifted away from him, not in a sudden tide, but like a shoreline receding inch by inch. She was always busy, always in a meeting, always on a call. Their apartment became less of a shared home and more of a shared space, a place she returned to late at night to sleep before leaving again early the next morning. Their conversations, once filled with shared jokes and future plans, became logistical exchanges. "I won't be home for dinner. I have to fly to Monaco for a conference. Can you pick up my dry cleaning?" He was no longer her husband. He was her assistant. Liam played his part. He was patient, supportive, and observant. He watched as new, expensive clothes filled her side of the closet. He saw the receipts for lavish dinners he wasn't invited to. He heard the growing confidence in her voice as she talked about closing deals and leveraging assets. She was performing the role of a high-powered financier, and she was growing into the costume. He tried, once or twice, to reconnect. "We haven't had a real conversation in weeks, Chloe," he said one evening as she was packing an overnight bag. She sighed, an exasperated sound. "Liam, I'm building a business. Our business. This is what it takes. I thought you understood that. I need you to be supportive, not needy." The word needy struck him. He, who had provided the very capital she was using, was being framed as a dependent. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. "I am supportive," he replied calmly. "I just miss my wife." "She's right here," Chloe said, zipping her bag with a sharp final sound. "She's just busy making us rich. Isn't that what you wanted?" She kissed him on the cheek, a dry, perfunctory gesture, and walked out the door. Then exactly 8 weeks after the money had left his account, he came home to a different kind of silence. It wasn't the usual quiet of an empty apartment waiting for its occupants. It was a hollow, definitive emptiness. The air felt thinner. He called her name. "Chloe?" No answer. He walked into their bedroom. The first thing he noticed was the closet. Her side, once overflowing, was bare. A few stray wire hangers were all that remained. He moved to the bathroom. Her makeup, her perfumes, her collection of expensive creams, all gone. A single, cheap toothbrush, the one she kept for emergencies, sat alone in the holder like a tombstone. A cold dread, sharp and painful, pierced through him. He pulled out his phone and checked their joint account, the one where he had deposited the £250,000. The balance read £4.17. It was a clean, clinical amputation. No note, no text message, no final, tearful phone call. Just a void. He had been surgically removed from her life. He sat on the edge of the bed, the silence of the room pressing in on him. He felt a surge of emotions, anger, betrayal, a profound, aching sadness. But beneath it all, something else was beginning to form. A cold, hard clarity. The wager was complete. The hand had been played, and he had his answer. The next day he drove to the Harlows' house. He needed to hear it from them. He needed to see their faces when they confirmed what he already knew. He rang the doorbell, and Eleanor opened it. Her expression was one of mild surprise, quickly masked by a cool composure. "Liam," she said, not moving to let him in. "What a surprise." "I need to speak with Chloe, Eleanor," he said, his voice steady. "I'm afraid that's not possible. She isn't here." "Where is she?" At that moment, Richard appeared behind her, holding a glass of scotch. He placed a hand on his wife's shoulder and looked at Liam with an expression of weary condescension. "Liam, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. Come in." He led Liam not to the comfortable living room, but to his study, a room paneled in dark wood and filled with self-important accolades. It was a room for dismissals. Richard sat behind his large mahogany desk, a king on his throne. "Chloe has moved on," he said without preamble. "She's decided to start a new life, one more aligned with her ambitions." "A new life? We're married, Richard." Richard took a slow sip of his scotch. A youthful mistake on her part. She was fond of you, of course, but fondness isn't a foundation for a life. Not a life like the one she is destined for. You were a chapter, Liam. A pleasant one, perhaps. But the book moves on. And the money? Liam asked, his voice dangerously quiet. My life savings? Richard actually chuckled, a low, dismissive sound. Consider it an investment in Chloe's education. A severance package, if you will. She's putting it to good use, building a future. You should be happy for her. Frankly, you should be grateful for the time you had. You were punching well above your weight, and you knew it. The cruelty was breathtaking in its casualness. They hadn't just taken his money and his wife. They were robbing him of his dignity, his history, his very significance. They were erasing him. So that's it? Liam asked. She's gone, the money's gone, and I'm supposed to just walk away? That is precisely it, Richard confirmed, his patience clearly wearing thin. Go back to your little life, Liam. Design some kitchens. Rebuild your little savings. You'll be fine. You're a survivor. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have important business to attend to. He stood, a clear signal that the audience was over. Liam looked at the man who had orchestrated the destruction of his marriage, at the man who saw him as nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a piece of dust to be brushed off a lapel. And in that moment, the sadness that had been weighing on him evaporated, replaced by something as cold and hard as steel. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't plead or threaten. He simply nodded. Thank you for your clarity, Richard, he said. He turned and walked out of the study, past Eleanor, who stood hovering in the hall, and out the front door into the clean, cold air. The drive back to his apartment was strangely calm. The storm of emotion had passed, leaving behind a landscape of pure, unadulterated purpose. They thought they had broken him. They thought they had won. They had no idea that they had just armed him. Back in his apartment, the silence that had felt so oppressive the night before now felt like a sanctuary. It was the quiet of a command center, a war room. Liam walked over to a simple, elegant cabinet in the corner of his living room. He opened it, revealing not books or records, but a single, breathtakingly intricate architectural model. It was a miniature city block, rendered in stunning detail. Sleek, silver towers curved towards the sky, connected by green, foliage-draped sky bridges. Tiny, glowing vehicles moved along silent tracks. It was a vision of the future, a perfect fusion of technology and nature. This was the dream house he had been working on. It was never just a house. It was a concept, a thesis, the culmination of a decade of his life's real work. He gently ran a finger along the edge of one of the miniature towers. It was the symbolic object, not of a lost dream, but of a power they couldn't even conceive of. This model wasn't a fantasy, it was a schematic. He picked up his phone. He didn't call friends for comfort. He didn't call a therapist to process his grief. He made 2 calls. The first was to a man named David Chen, his partner. David, Liam said, his voice calm and clear. It's Liam. The test is complete. The result was a categorical failure. I need you to move all my personal assets from the holding company into the primary Orion account. And I want you to buy every available share of Harlow & Son Construction. Use the secondary fund. Be discreet. There was a pause on the other end, then David's voice, warm and sharp. Consider it done. Are you okay, Liam? I've never been better, Liam replied, and he meant it. The second call was to a number he hadn't dialed in over a year. It was the private line of Arthur Vance. Arthur was not just a lawyer, he was a legend. A corporate litigator so feared and respected that his name alone could make boards of directors tremble. He was also an old friend of Liam's father and had served on the advisory board of Liam's company since its inception. Arthur, Liam said, it's Liam Sterling. Liam, Arthur's voice boomed, full of old-world gravitas. I was wondering when you'd tire of your sabbatical in mediocrity. What's the occasion? I'm calling in the favor, Arthur. The big one. A smile was evident in Arthur's voice. I've been waiting, tell me everything. And Liam did. He laid out the entire story, from the condescending dinners to the stolen money to Richard's final, brutal dismissal. He spoke without emotion, presenting the facts like a case study. When he was finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Arthur spoke, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Richard Harlow, I know him. Small-time bully with a big-time ego. Thinks he's a player. He has no idea who he's dealing with, does he? None at all, Liam confirmed. This is not just unprofessional, it's profoundly disrespectful, Arthur growled. Leave it with me, Liam. I'm going to arrange a meeting, a formal mediation. They'll assume it's to negotiate your surrender. Let them. Oh, this is going to be exquisite. Over the next 2 weeks, Liam and Arthur prepared. It was a meticulous, strategic operation. Arthur's team of forensic accountants traced the £250,000. As Liam had suspected, Chloe and Marcus hadn't invested it in a Zurich fund. They had wired it to a shell corporation registered in a country with notoriously lax financial regulations. The boutique lifestyle fund was a classic advance fee scam, and they had fallen for it hook, line, and sinker. Arthur's team compiled a dossier on the scam, thick with evidence of its fraudulent nature. Meanwhile, Liam worked with David. They consolidated his assets, preparing the documentation that would prove his true identity. Liam Sterling, co-founder and chief design officer of Orion Architecture, one of the most innovative and successful architectural firms in the world. A company whose private valuation was in the billions. A company that had just, under a pseudonym, won the single largest urban redevelopment contract in the city's history, the very contract Richard Harlow had been desperately lobbying for. The final piece of the puzzle was the symbolic object, the model. Liam had it professionally photographed, creating a presentation that showed its evolution from initial sketch to the detailed blueprint for the Oasis project, the revolutionary, sustainable living hub that was the centerpiece of the city's redevelopment plan. The plan that would make or break every major construction firm in the region for the next decade. When Arthur Vance's letter arrived at the Harlow residence, it was on thick, creamy cardstock, bearing the embossed letterhead of the most prestigious law firm in the country. It was a summons to a meeting in their conference room to discuss the dissolution of the marriage of Chloe and Liam Sterling and to resolve all outstanding financial matters. Richard saw the letterhead and smiled. He thought Liam had scraped together his last few pennies to hire a half-decent lawyer in a desperate final plea. He saw it as a sign of weakness. He called Arthur Vance's office himself. "Mr. Harlow here," he denounced to the secretary. "Tell Mr. Vance we will be there, but make it clear to your client that our position is non-negotiable." The stage was set. The actors were all in their places. The quiet man they had dismissed was ready to begin the second act, and this time he would be directing. The day of the meeting arrived, crisp and bright. Liam dressed with intentional simplicity, a dark navy suit, impeccably tailored but understated, a white shirt, no tie. He was the image of the man they thought they knew, a carefully constructed piece of camouflage. He arrived at Arthur Vance's firm a half-hour early and met with Arthur in his private office, a room that smelled of old leather, polish, and power. Arthur, a lion of a man in his late 60s, with a mane of white hair and piercing blue eyes, stood by the window, looking down at the city below. "They're on their way," he said without turning. "Richard called my office this morning to reiterate his position. The man's arrogance is a caricature. It would be funny if it weren't so vulgar." "Let him be arrogant," Liam said calmly, taking a seat. "It will make the fall that much harder." Arthur turned, a grim smile on his face. "Everything is in place. The documents are on the tablet, the financial disclosures, the Orion prospectus, the due diligence report on the lifestyle fund, the schematics for the Oasis project. It's a symphony of destruction, my boy, and you are the conductor. A secretary buzzed. The Harlow party has arrived. Send them to conference room 1, Arthur instructed. Tell them Mr. Sterling will be with them shortly. He looked at Liam. Let them wait. Let them sit in that cold, intimidating room and feel important for a few more minutes. Let them enjoy the view from the top before they realize they're on the wrong building. In conference room 1, the Harlows took their seats. Richard, at the head of their side of the obsidian table, surveyed the room with an appraising eye. Good firm, he conceded to Marcus. Expensive. The boy's desperate. This is a shakedown, nothing more. He'll posture, then he'll fold. Marcus smirked. How much do you think he wants? 10 grand? 20? Chloe said nothing. She stared out the window, her knuckles white where she gripped her handbag. For the first time, a sliver of doubt had entered her mind. The sheer opulence of the law firm, the deference with which they had been treated, it didn't quite fit the picture of a ruined man making a final, pathetic plea. After 5 long minutes, the door opened. Liam entered, followed by Arthur Vance. The sight of Arthur caused the first crack in Richard's composure. He knew Arthur Vance by reputation. Everyone did. Vance didn't handle messy divorces for small-time architects. He dismantled corporations. He dethroned CEOs. Richard's smile tightened. Arthur, he said, forcing a note of bonhomie into his voice, I didn't realize you were involved in this little matter. Arthur didn't smile back. He took the seat beside Liam, placing a slim tablet on the table before him. There are no little matters when it comes to my clients, Richard. Only matters of principle. Liam looked across the table, his gaze resting for a moment on each of them. On Marcus, whose smirk was beginning to look brittle. On Eleanor, who had joined them, her face a mask of anxious propriety. And finally on Chloe, whose eyes met his for a fleeting second before darting away. Thank you for coming, Liam began, his voice as calm and measured as ever. I wanted to do this face to face to ensure there are no misunderstandings as we move forward. Richard leaned forward, taking control. There's nothing to misunderstand, Liam. We've been over this. Chloe has made her choice. We are prepared, as a gesture of goodwill, to offer you a sum of £20,000 to cover your legal fees and any personal inconvenience. You sign the divorce papers and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, and we all walk away. It was even more insulting than Liam had imagined. He didn't react. He simply let the offer hang in the silent room, its condescension echoing off the glass walls. No, Liam said simply. Richard blinked. I'm sorry? I'm not accepting your offer, Liam clarified. He turned to his wife. Chloe, 8 weeks ago I gave you £250,000. You told me it was an investment in our future. You, Marcus, and your father all celebrated this bold move. Where is that money now? Chloe flushed. It's invested. It's working. These things take time. Is it? Liam asked softly. He nodded to Arthur, who tapped the tablet on the table. A holographic display shimmered to life in the center of the table, showing a complex web of wire transfers. Our investigation shows the money was wired to this entity, Apex Global Ventures, registered in Belize. From there, it was funneled through 2 other shell companies before disappearing entirely. The top-tier team from Zurich doesn't exist. The eco-tourism resorts are stock photos from a travel blog. It was a scam, Chloe. A rather unsophisticated one at that. The color drained from Marcus's face. That's not possible. Our contacts were vetted. By whom? By you? Liam's voice remained level, but it now carried a sharp, surgical edge. My firm's risk assessment division flagged this exact scam 4 months ago. We have a full dossier on it. It targets arrogant, greedy, and unsophisticated investors who are desperate to feel like they're part of an exclusive club. Sound familiar? Richard slammed his hand on the table. This is an outrage. You're trying to intimidate us with smoke and mirrors. What firm are you talking about? Your one-man band? sketching attic conversions. This was the moment, the pivot upon which the entire world would turn. Liam leaned forward slightly. I was never a sole practitioner, Richard. That was an assumption you made, and I never felt the need to correct it. My firm is called Orion Architecture. The name meant nothing to them. Richard scoffed. Orion Architecture? Never heard of it. I'm not surprised, Liam said. We don't put our name on our buildings. We let the work speak for itself. But perhaps you've heard of our most recent project. Arthur tapped the tablet again. The wire transfer diagram was replaced by a stunning, photorealistic render of a futuristic city skyline. The very model from Liam's apartment, now brought to life. This is the winning bid for the waterfront redevelopment project, Liam stated. Code name, the Oasis Project. A choked sound came from Richard's throat. His face, which had been red with anger, was now a waxy, sickly white. The waterfront redevelopment was the project that was supposed to secure his company's future for the next 20 years. His firm, Harlow & Son, had spent millions on a bid they were certain would win. They had been beaten by a mysterious, heavily funded consortium that came out of nowhere. You? Richard whispered, his voice trembling. That was you? That was us, Liam confirmed. Orion Architecture is the lead firm on the entire project. We are the architects, the engineers, and the project managers. And I am not just an architect at Orion. I am the co-founder and chief design officer. I own 50% of the company. He let that sink in. He watched the dawning horror on their faces as the scale of their miscalculation began to crash down on them. The money, Chloe stammered, her voice barely audible. The £250,000 was an experiment, Liam finished for her, his eyes locking onto hers. The manufactured calm in his voice finally broke, revealing the bedrock of cold fury beneath. It was a test, Chloe, a test of character, of loyalty, of love. I gave you what you thought was my entire world, just to see what you would do with it. Would you protect it, cherish it, or would you feed it to your family's ego? You and your father and your brother, you didn't just fail the test, you incinerated it. You danced on its ashes. He stood up, his tall frame seeming to fill the room. You mocked my little dream house. Those sketches I showed you, Chloe, they weren't for a house. They were the initial concept designs for the Oasis project, a project with a construction budget of £5 billion. He looked at Richard, whose face had crumpled into a mask of pure despair. Your company, Harlow & Son, is currently being considered as a subcontractor for the foundation work. A small but lucrative piece of the pie. Your bid is on my desk. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by a soft, ragged gasp from Chloe. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been inverted with a violence that left them breathless. The man they had treated as a bug was now the god of their universe. The game was over, and they had lost in a way they didn't even know was possible. The immediate aftermath was a tableau of disintegration. Richard Harlow, the patriarch, the king of his small hill, seemed to shrink in his chair. The florid, confident man who had entered the room was gone, replaced by a pale, trembling old man staring at the holographic city glowing on the table as if it were his own execution order. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The engine of his arrogance had seized. Marcus was the first to break. His face, a blotchy mess of red and white, turned on his sister. You! He hissed, his voice cracking with panic. This is your fault. You and your stupid, greedy... He couldn't finish, his mind unable to process the sheer scale of the disaster. He had been a big shot, a player, for 8 weeks. Now he was just a fool who had been conned out of £250,000, and in the process had torpedoed his family's entire future. Chloe was frozen. Her gaze was fixed on Liam, her expression a maelstrom of shock, horror, and a dawning, terrible understanding. She wasn't just looking at the man she had betrayed, she was looking at the life she had thrown away. The genuine partnership, the staggering wealth, the incredible success. She had held it all in her hand and had traded it for a cheap illusion, prodded on by the petty vanities of her family. The man she thought was a stepping stone was, in fact, the mountain. It was Arthur Vance who spoke into the vacuum, his voice like the tolling of a great bell. "My client has made his position clear," he said, standing and deactivating the holographic display. The room plunged back into a stark, unforgiving reality. Regarding the £250,000, Mr. Sterling considers it the cost of a valuable, if painful, education. He will not be pursuing its return. It is, for him, an irrelevant sum. The casual dismissal of what to them was a life-altering amount of money was perhaps the cruelest cut of all. It defined the chasm between their world and his more effectively than any bank statement could. However, Arthur continued, his eyes resting on Richard, all other matters are now subject to a new reality. Harlow and Sons' bid for the subcontract on the Oasis project will be re-evaluated. If it is accepted, you will find that Orion Architecture's standards for performance, transparency, and accountability are rigorous. There will be no room for error, no allowances for ego. You will deliver on time, on budget, and to our exact specifications. Or you will be replaced. Is that understood? Richard could only manage a weak, jerky nod. He was no longer a peer or a superior. He was a supplicant. As for the personal matters, Liam said, his voice quiet once more, the divorce papers will be sent to you. I expect them to be signed and returned within 48 hours. There will be no further negotiation. There will be no non-disclosure agreement. I do not care if you speak of this. Your version of events will hold no currency. He looked at Chloe one last time. The anger had receded, leaving behind a profound, weary sadness. I loved you, he said, the words simple and devastating. Or, I loved the person I thought you were. I see now that person never really existed. With that, he turned and walked out of the room. Arthur Vance gathered his tablet and followed, leaving the three of them to sit in the ruins of their world, the silence of the obsidian room, their only companion. As the door clicked shut, they heard the first sound of true collapse, a dry, racking sob from Chloe, a sound of absolute and irrevocable loss. The weeks that followed were a study in consequences. Poetic justice, Liam reflected, was not about vengeance, it was about balance. Actions have weight, and the world, eventually, finds a way to level the scales. For Richard Harlow, the consequence was a slow, grinding humiliation. His company was granted the subcontract, a decision Liam made deliberately. It was not an act of mercy, but a strategic sentence. Harlow and Son was now tethered to Orion Architecture, subject to weekly progress reports, surprise site inspections, and meticulous budget audits conducted by Liam's formidable chief financial officer. Richard, who had once held court in his own boardroom, now found himself being summoned to meetings where junior project managers from Orion would question his timelines and critique his methods. He was a king reduced to a provincial governor, forced to bow to a higher authority he had once mocked. The stress aged him a decade. For Marcus, the fall was faster and more brutal. With the family's liquid assets decimated by the scam and the company's profits squeezed by Orion's strict oversight, there were no more funds for his ventures. His flashy car was repossessed. His trendy apartment was swapped for a small rental in a less fashionable part of town. Stripped of the financial padding that had fueled his arrogance, he was revealed to be exactly what he was, a man of mediocre talent and an inflated sense of self. The last Liam heard, Marcus was working in a mid-level sales job for a building supplies company, a position his father had to beg a competitor to give him. He was, in a bitter twist of fate, now forced to sell materials to the very project that had ruined him. For Chloe, the consequence was existential. She was adrift. Her family, consumed by their own downfall, had no comfort to offer. Her father regarded her with a new, cold resentment as the catalyst for their disgrace. Marcus blamed her entirely. Her friends, who had flocked to her when she was the exciting new player, now avoided her calls, sensing the stain of failure. 2 months after the meeting, she came to him. He was no longer in the modest apartment she had known. He was home. Home was the penthouse of one of the city's most exclusive residential towers, a building his own firm had designed. It was a sprawling space of glass, steel, and light, with a panoramic view of the entire city. The doorman, who knew Liam as Mr. Sterling, announced her arrival with professional discretion. Liam agreed to see her. He met her not in the grand living area, but on the vast, open-air terrace, surrounded by a garden of wind-strafed trees and exotic flowers. She looked different. The expensive, aggressive fashion was gone, replaced by a simple, elegant dress. She was thinner, and the vibrant, almost manic energy had been replaced by a fragile uncertainty. "Liam," she began, her voice hesitant, "you're home. It's beautiful." "Thank you," he said, his tone polite, neutral. I came to apologize," she said, twisting a strap on her handbag. What I did, was unforgivable. I know that. I was a fool. I was blinded by everything, by my father's expectations, by the desire to be someone important." He listened, saying nothing. "I see that now," she continued, her eyes welling with tears. "I see what I threw away. You were the important thing, Liam. Not the money, not the status. You, the life we could have had." She took a tentative step towards him. Is there any chance we can find our way back? I can change. I will change. I love you." Liam looked at her, and for a moment, he felt a flicker of the old affection. He saw the woman he had wanted to build a life with, but it was only a ghost. He knew that her apology, while perhaps sincere in the moment, was born of her loss, not of a fundamental change in her character. She was still mesmerized by the symbols of success, this apartment, his status. She had simply realized she had backed the wrong horse. "The apology is for you, Chloe, not for me," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's the first step in figuring out who you are without your father's name or a man's wealth behind you. But it doesn't change anything between us." "Why?" she whispered, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I know I hurt you, but people make mistakes. We can fix this." "Some things can't be fixed," he replied, turning to look out at the city lights twinkling below. "A relationship is like a building. It needs a solid foundation. Ours, I discovered, was built on a lie. Not my lie, Chloe, yours. You knew how your family saw me. You knew how they treated me. And you not only allowed it, you participated in it. You were willing to be married to a man you and your family held in contempt, as long as it was convenient." He turned back to face her. "The money didn't matter. I told you that. What mattered was the respect. You didn't respect me. You didn't see me. You saw a comfortable, safe option. When you thought you had a better one, you discarded me without a second thought. I can't build a life on a foundation like that. It will always be compromised. It will always be weak." He walked her to the door of the apartment. "I do not wish you ill, Chloe," he said, and he meant it. "I hope you find what you're looking for. I hope you learn to value things that are real. But you can't find it with me. That door is closed." He opened the door for her, and she walked out into the hallway without looking back. He closed the door, the soft, solid click echoing in the quiet apartment. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a quiet, somber sense of closure. The final balance had been paid. Months later, Liam stood on that same terrace, the schematics for the next phase of the Oasis project spread out on an outdoor table. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The city below was a glittering tapestry of light and life. He thought back to the man in the modest apartment, the quiet architect in love with a supernova. He had lost a wife, yes. He had endured humiliation and betrayal, but in the fire he had forged something stronger. He had shed the camouflage he had worn for so long and had reclaimed his own identity, not just as a successful man, but as a man of integrity and self-worth. The pain of the betrayal had faded, replaced by a quiet wisdom. He had learned that true strength isn't about displaying power, but about having the patience and character to know when and how to use it. He had learned that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or real estate, but in respect, trust, and the unshakable knowledge of one's own value. He looked out at the skyline he was helping to reshape. He felt a sense of peace, of purpose. He was not a victim seeking revenge, nor a victor gloating over his vanquished foes. He was simply a man who had demanded to be seen, to be valued for who he truly was. And in the end, he was the only one whose valuation truly mattered. It's a powerful lesson, isn't it? That our real worth isn't determined by how others see us, but by how we see ourselves. And that sometimes the most difficult moments in our lives are the ones that force us to stand up and declare that worth, not with anger, but with quiet, unshakable truth. What did you think of Liam's final decision? Would you have done the same? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments section below. Your stories and perspectives are what make this community so special. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of justice, redemption, and the quiet strength that lies within us all. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.